Good evening, my name is Casper, and today we're going to be talking about OZMAFIA, which is an otome visual novel dating simulator created by poni-patchet SY and released on Manga Gamer last week. It tells the story of Fuka, a woman who wakes up in the middle of an alley just as a man named Caesar insists that he will end her life. When she flees from the alley and through a town she knows literally nothing about, she comes across a man named Kiri and a man named Karamiya of the Oz family, who protect her from Caesar and take her into their home upon learning she has total amnesia. Then, of course, drama and romance ensues, and this is gonna be a long-ass review because I have many things to say. I just hit my mic. I don't really know if I was entirely in love with the writing or not. I'm really on the fence about it. You see, the story starts out really well, and I really love the way that we got to meet the wide variety of very creatively created characters. And we're gonna cover that in a second. You see, when I was first playing the game, I decided that I wasn't going to go for the very obvious picks that the developers clearly wanted me to go after. No, I wasn't going to go for the enigmatic bad boy or the male tsundere. No, I was going for the cutie patootie that ran his own little outdoor cafe. And then I went for the swaggy doctor. I learned very quickly how much of a mistake both of those decisions were for reasons I will not get into because spoilers. It's sad. But because I pursued the characters that you absolutely have to go out of your way to appeal to, I learned very quickly how the main plot of the game is kind of nonsense. You see, over the course of the game, you were introduced to a totally new culture that puts a lot of emphasis on festivals. So, the cutie patootie from the outdoor cafe asks you to go to a bread festival with him, which is run by the Grimm family. The rest of the Oz family asks for your input on the festival they're gonna run. And there's a big build-up for a beauty pageant that you're entered in, but we never get to see any of it. I mean, we got to the very end of the pageant, and the moon gazing festival, which is like all of the mafia families get in on, that's sort of like the turning point / end point for the main story. But even then, those are only like glimpses. And I mean, that is kind of annoying because how am I supposed to care about these festivals if I never get to see any of them? And some of these festivals are supposed to be relatively important for whatever relationship that you're trying to establish with the hunk of your choosing. And it goes on like that for the entire duration of the story, which is about 5 hours per route, if you don't skip over all the bullshit you've read 20 times already. And there are a shit ton of routes, just saying. And they're all pretty different from each other. Like, the amount of variety that we were given was pretty insane. Which brings me to my next point. The writers definitely chose quantity over quality. And if you hear my AC kicking on, that is because my husband insists on living in a subarctic apartment. Like I said, there are a ton of routes, and each route is going to have multiple endings that can either be dramatically different from one another, or they can be sort of like alternate versions of each other, which isn't a bad thing. One of the like variation route ending things was actually like really well done. But with the main plot of the game dragging on and skipping over most of the cool shit instead of incorporating it into each of the routes, you would think that each character route would be intriguing enough for me to completely overlook that. And that wasn't entirely the case in a lot of the situations. Like I said earlier, you definitely have to go way out of your way to interact with any of the characters outside of the Oz Famiglia. And you will rarely ever interact with them outside of the 1 day a week that you're actually given to just roam about town. So that doesn't give you a ton of time to spend with your boo in the like 5-hour time window that you're allotted for each route. So when it came to the romance aspect, there were some that just felt a little rushed. Not so rushed that I felt completely removed from the story and the romance aspect, because I did feel like there was a genuine connection between some of these characters. But I did feel like they had to, you know, force some of the cutesy romance scenes, and that was a little off-putting. And I never found out why Caesar's after you. He was a pretty poorly written antagonist. He shows up like, ah, my prey, I'm going to kill you. And everyone else is like, oh no, I'll save you, Fuka. And they pull out their sword, and then there's a sword fight. And then he goes away and he's like, I'll get you next time. Scooby-Doo reference. However, the writers did create unlockable scenes from the perspectives of the characters whose routes you've already finished, So like you get to see So and Karamiya having conversations in their own little world while Fuka's not around. As someone who gets raging hard-ons for unlockable scenes like that, that added a shit ton of replay value. Even if those characters, you know, ripped out my heart, broke it, lit it on fire, and then chucked it out the window. Though I do want to point out that the brothel route, was definitely, like, just absolutely my favorite. It was dark, it was depressing, it was creepy, it was twisted, and it sort of embodied all of the very dark undertones that the game has. I mean, though, if we're totally honest, this game is kind of heart-wrenching. Remember how when I reviewed No Thank You, I was like, oh yeah, this game made me depressed for like 3 solid days straight. OZMAFIA got pretty close. And I couldn't play the game to completion in time for this review, but there are few genuinely happy endings. Most of them are at best bittersweet, and a lot of them are just downright sad. What's interesting though is that there are these transfer options where, say you're on the path of Kyrie. I don't know if it's Kyrie or Kyrie, I'm just gonna meh. So you're on the path for Kyrie, and then something happens, and suddenly, oh, Karamiya is here for the rescue. A love triangle starts, and then you're given the option to sort of like choose the path you're already on, or you can sort of like transfer over to someone else's path. And that's the only way you're going to get all the CGs, I found out. And you don't get punished for choosing the transfer options either. I thought that was interesting. There is also the option, I believe, to be happy on your own, but I think it only is available on like 2 routes. And one of them is super specific. When it came to the actual characters themselves, I found it very interesting how they were supposed to be modern takes or heavily inspired by classic characters. Our 4 main characters are actually created to be reminiscent of the 4 main characters from The Wizard of Oz, with Dorothy being Fuka. And the entire cast of characters in the brothel were actually inspired by Oscar Wilde characters. In a sense, it almost reminded me of the sort of like edutainment visual novel Asphyxia, which I reviewed here. If anything, they were really only like symbolic homages to the characters that they were inspired by. So initially, I wasn't going to include a gameplay segment because you do get a lot of choices to make, like a metric shit ton. But for the most part, it follows the generic outline of visual novels. You can access a CG gallery from the main menu. The options allow you to change general stuff as well as individual voice volumes, which I thought was to be pretty nice because there were a couple of characters that had like really just loud, piercing voices. However, I did end up including a gameplay segment because there were a few things that bothered me. The first issue I had was definitely with the intermission scenes because there were just way too many of them. At first it really wasn't that bad because the story would progress normally and there was a lengthy amount of time between each intermission. However, after about the halfway or maybe 2/3 mark in the story, it seemed like every single scene was having a transition, and it kind of got to the point where I was like dreading every time the scene cut to black, and every time that song played, I felt like my ears were going to start bleeding at any moment. Also, this game is only partially voice acted in the sense that like half of the game is voice acted. At first, basically every single line had a voice attached to it, and these were really good voice actors too. But there comes a point in the game where the lines just kind of start to go silent. It's very sudden, it's very random, and it really felt like there was literally no rhyme or reason as to what lines were voiced and what were silent. It honestly felt like they realized at some point that they wouldn't be able to afford to voice the entire game, so they had to start throwing darts at random lines to see which ones were voiced. It did become a little disorienting, and at first I thought it was kind of like a bug. Turns out it wasn't. Usually partially voiced means that only the main characters have voice actors, but in this sense, just about every single character had a voice actor, but not all of their lines were voiced, and that was a little weird. It kind of made it feel incomplete if nothing else. This game is fucking beautiful. There is no other way to put it. It's so visually stunning that it's near the embodiment of perfection. As usual, let's start with the character designs. Like the cast of personalities, we are given a very diverse and very unique cast of characters that just absolutely brought the story to life. Whether it be the green-haired Kyrie, the extravagantly dressed Alphani, or the freaking purple-haired cat girl Patchet, no tool characters were like, and they're created with enough creativity where you could easily point them out in a collage of just random characters. But it's not just the fact that they're unique, they're also very cleverly created to embody the very famous characters that they're representing. There's the very obvious Scarlett, who is styled after Little Red Riding Hood, Karamia, who is designed after the lion from The Wizard of Oz, Caesar was created to embody the wolf-like traits so he could be presented as the big bad wolf, and so on. Even Manboy was created to be the sparrow from one of Oscar Wilde's stories. So I thought it was very intriguing to see some of these characters reimagined. But what did I think of the art itself? I could go on all day about how beautiful and perfect I found the art quality to be, but this is already like a 2,500 word review, and we're coming up on like 30 minutes of recording. At first glance, this almost looks like a sort of watercolory style of art style that uses subtle shade gradation over harsh shadows where it can. It created for a very smooth, very calming, and aesthetically pleasing effect that is persistent throughout the entire game. I also loved how the lines were loose and sketchy as opposed to bold and perfectly straight, especially in the hairs and eyes. And oh my god, you guys, the eyes, they're so gorgeous, like holy shit. Hell, if nothing else about the art captivates your interest, then at least take the time to appreciate how bright and colorful and shiny and visually astonishing the eye designs are. Though Ande kinda had like those super flashy crazy eyes going. And there was just so much detail in everything. The hair, the eyelashes, the folds in the clothing, the accents in the clothing. I can only imagine how much time and effort went into creating each and every one of these characters and their multiple poses. It's just overwhelming to think of how much work went into creating something so fantastic. Like, CGs aside, just the character sprites themselves are phenomenal. Though the CGs are like just spectacular in every single way. Like, this is the type of artwork you really only ever see on very high quality manga covers. And we haven't even gotten onto the world design yet. There's the bright, serene church, the colorful dress shop, the deceitfully beautiful and elegant looking brothel, the dark and rundown slums. I can hardly put into words how impressed I was with the world design, which seamlessly meshed with the character sprites. I'm usually not at this much of a loss for words unless BTS drops a new single, which, hold up for just a second, who else was absolutely in love with Fire's choreography? Oh my god. Anyways, I just feel like nothing I can say will do this game justice. So all in all, I am definitely just so happy I got to play this. Was the writing a little lacking in parts? Yes, it did have its flaws. However, it did leave an emotional impact on me. I very much was emotionally invested in the story, and for all intents and purposes, it lived up to my expectations because I have been waiting for this game to come out for a long time. Combine the writing with wonderful voice acting, absolutely stellar artwork, an exquisite soundtrack that brought everything together just how a soundtrack should, and a shit ton of replay value that had me sink over 20 hours into it, and I still only got into like 64% completion. And you have yourself a game that will probably be my favorite of 2016, and if it's not my favorite, it's definitely going to be in my top 5. Anyways, those are my thoughts on OZMAFIA. Have you played it? Which one was your number 1 bae? If we're honest, I had a soft spot for Axel, but I don't think anyone's surprised. But let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon and a link to buy the game in the description below. Happy unbirthday, and I will see you later. Bye!